Hey guys, it's Chris at Highline Guitars. Welcome back to the channel. The last video that I posted, I invited you, the viewer, to watch as I carved a neck using my new X-Carve Pro CNC machine. And I have to say I was really surprised by the response. In fact, I've noticed over the years as I produce videos where I talk about using CNC technology to make guitars, those videos are getting more and more views than my other normal videos. And so I think that kind of shows where the world of guitar building, even on a small scale, is headed. And the other day, I thought this would be kind of interesting. I decided to take a look at the market for CNC machines because I hadn't really looked at it in a lot of years, because before I had the X-Carve Pro, I had the machine which I designed and built myself. In fact, if you want to build one like it, you can head over to Guitar Plans and purchase the assembly manual for building that machine. It's a little bit more affordable than some of the other options that are out there. Anyway, as I looked at the market, I was amazed at the sheer number of consumer to pro-consumer level machines are out there. And the price range is anywhere from, just under $1,000 to several $1,000s. And there are dozens of different machines. It's amazing how many of them are out there. And just as a comparison, I thought it would be interesting to see how many overarm pin routers are on the market. And, I just did a quick search, but all I could find was 2 machines. And both of them are sold by Grizzly Tool. And one of them starts at, I think it was around $3,500, $3,600. And then the next one up was $5,500. And of course, that doesn't include shipping. But for the price of those machines, you can buy a really nice consumer grade or prosumer CNC machine. So I think that kind of shows where the market's heading. If you want to learn to build guitars using a pin router, go for it. But do so knowing you're probably not going to be able to run out and buy a pin router. There are just not that many of them out there. So, you can take that into consideration. At any rate, I got a lot of questions about carving necks and such with this new machine. And really what I've been doing lately is I've been doing a lot of test cuts, and here are some of the fruits of that effort. I've got 3 maple necks that I carved and 1 mahogany neck. And really what I was trying to do was dial in my carving strategies primarily from a standpoint of CAM, which is, creating the tool paths and G-code for running the machine. And I knew that with this machine, I was going to have the opportunity to run the machine and to make the carves at a much higher feed rate with a much greater depth of cut. I also knew that when you start increasing feed rate and depth of cut, you are increasing the amount of force that's applied by the spindle and the bit to the wood that you're carving into. And that can have some impacts as far as your carving strategy. So I kind of wanted to work through that a little bit. And I discovered a number of things along the way as I was making these test cuts. And one of the things that I had done was I was kind of exploring the difference between a X-axis parallel finish cut and a Y-axis parallel finish cut. Now with the X-axis parallel, which is what I prefer, the tool, the bit is going back and forth across the expanse of the neck's contour. And I like that because I get a really smooth surface. And once it's finished, I can go pretty much straight to 220 grit sanding before I apply my finish. Now the alternative to that is to do a y-axis parallel, where the bit is running the length back and forth as it performs the finish cut. This takes a little bit less time, but if you don't change the bit, if you keep using the same bit for the rough carve as well as the finishing pass, which in my case is just a 1/4 inch diameter end mill, the surface is, it's much rougher. There are obvious tool marks, and that requires me to step back to like a 120 grit sandpaper to sand out those tool marks before I progress up to my 220 grit. And the only way to really avoid that with a y-axis parallel finish is after the rough carve is done, I need to swap out the bit from an end mill to a ball nose. And I could certainly do that, but I'm kind of lazy sometimes when it comes to carving, and I just like the finish pass to start as soon as the rough pass is completed. And so I don't want to really bother with changing out the bit. And this machine doesn't have an automatic tool changer. So I'm kind of left with having to stop the machine after the rough carve and swap out the bit for the ball nose. And frankly, I just don't want to bother with that. So I'm willing to take a few extra minutes in the carving operation to do the x-axis parallel finish. And that means I can save quite a bit of time when it comes to the finish sanding once the neck has been carved. So obviously I had to play around with some of my carving strategies, and that's what I've been doing for the last couple of days. Now with the last cut, I had run out of my maple blanks, so I had to use a mahogany blank. And I ended up with a situation that, believe it or not, is actually, I don't want to say it's common, but it can happen with mahogany. And I find it happens more often than mahogany than it does with maple. And I like to think of it as asking the question, is your wood good? Because you may think your wood is good, but your wood may not be good. In fact, your wood may be bad and you just don't know it. And with mahogany, what you see isn't always what you get. You can't always judge a book by its cover. This is what the blank looks like when I first start out. And when I grabbed the blank to carve my mahogany neck, everything looked pretty perfect. I couldn't see any flaws anywhere on the surface. No cracks, no knots, nothing. No weird grain. It looked perfect. But after carving the neck, I discovered that, in fact, the grain wasn't perfect. Or I should say the blank wasn't perfect. Unbeknownst to me, there was a crack inside the thickness of the blank that I couldn't see from either the top or the back. It was a drying crack. These happen more often, I think, with mahogany than with maple. And what happens is as the wood is being dried, cracks can form inside the wood that you might not see. So once the neck had been carved and I liberated the neck from the blank, I could see a very fine hairline crack that had run all the way across the width of the neck. And I knew right away what it was, but what I did was I flooded it with some CA glue, not because I wanted to try to repair the crack or to reinforce it. I had no intention of using this neck once I saw that crack. I knew it was a no-go. But CA glue, the thin CA glue, because of its capillary action, will soak into that crack. And what you can do is you can flood a crack like that and then flip it over, and if you see the CA glue appearing on the top surface, you know the crack runs all the way through the wood. And it did. So then I did the next thing that I like to do after I carve a neck, and I do this every single time I carve a neck. Once I get the neck liberated from the blank, I'll hold it up and I'll bend it. and I'll bend it in both directions. And I'll do this in a room like my shop here with no noise. No machines are running. There's no music playing. It's silent. And I listen for that telltale sign of a problem. And that usually reveals itself in the sound of cracking. And if you hear that, you want to go a little bit further and see how bad it gets. Now, typically, if you start to hear cracking as you're bending the neck, that neck is firewood. But in this case, as I was bending it, and I was actually applying quite a bit more force than it would ever be exposed to under string tension. But you always have to be careful, regardless. And as I was bending it, I could hear that crack. It was pretty noticeable. And as I pushed it further, it snapped. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to throw this into my outdoor stove on my patio, burn it, and maybe roast some marshmallows over it. So that's what can happen. So, and another thing that I had noticed on the neck was a knot had appeared. Now, I'm really not too concerned with knots. In this case, the knot isn't going to cause any problems with the structural integrity of the neck, and it's not going to affect playability. It is visible, you can see it, but it's wood, and I accept that. If this knot had appeared up near the volute here, then I'd be a little more concerned, because this is an area where the dimension of the neck can be compromised by a knot, and that can cause it to fail. So when you're shopping for wood, you have to expect that there's always going to be the potential for there to be flaws inside the wood that you can't see. And this is more common with woods like mahogany or black limba. It's less of an issue with woods like maple. Maple tends to be pretty consistent, although I have had occasions where I've carved a neck and I have encountered some rotting grain deep inside the wood, but it's not very common. I would say out of every 100 maple necks that I've carved, I would say maybe 1 or 2 ends up with an issue that renders that neck unusable. With mahogany, out of every 100 necks, I'd say it's closer to 10 or 15 necks that I can't use because of flaws that were not visible. Now, why does this happen? Well, it's hard to say, but I talked to a friend of mine who is in the lumber business several years ago about kiln drying wood. And he said that when you're kiln drying wood, you have to control the environment very precisely based on the species of wood that you're drying. In other words, you can't dry maple the same way that you would mahogany. And so you have to be, the person who's doing the drying has to be aware of those different settings for different species. And it's really important that it be done correctly. If not, what happens with mahogany is, as it's drying internally, some of those wood fibers can pull apart and cause an internal drying cracks. And that's what happened with this. And unfortunately, there's really not much you can do about it when you buy the blanks. You can't really look at it and see where you might have potential problems. They just aren't visible at all. It's not going to appear until you cut that piece of wood into a guitar neck. So if you're building only one guitar and you can only afford one piece of wood for your neck, if you want to use mahogany, you're kind of taking a risk there. There's always that potential that blank that you purchase may not be suitable, and you're not going to know it until you carve it. If you want to be assured of a quality neck, I would suggest going with maple. And when it comes to maple, I prefer wood. I prefer like an Eastern Rock hard maple, straight grain, no figure. I've I've made enough figured necks over the years to know that, yeah, sure, flamed maple necks look pretty, but they can be an absolute nightmare over time because they tend to move in ways that are unpredictable, and they will move. So I've kind of veered away from that. And the only time that I'll use figured maple for a neck is if a customer is absolutely adamant that I use it. Otherwise, I do everything I can to steer them away from it because there's just too many potential playability issues. At any rate, that's really what I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to lecture you on wood. Is wood good or is the wood bad? And hopefully you'll find this video to be useful. If so, as always, give it a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button if you like to watch videos on building guitars, whether it's the traditional method or the new normal, which is CNC technology. And if you want to help support this channel and keep me making videos, head over to eGuitar Plans, purchase a plan for a guitar or one of the many different tools that I use, including my CNC machine, or my flip-top workbenches, the drum sander, my buffing machine, all those tools. And even if you don't build the plan that you purchase, just know that your purchase is helping to support this channel. And if you don't want to buy a plan at all, I've got a merch shelf down below. If you can't see it, there'll be a link in the description where you can purchase a Highline Guitars t-shirt. So until the next episode, take care, stay safe, and I'll see you soon.